Welcome to Plan 9 Crunch, and it's almost Christmas, and we're going to discuss A Christmas Carol, the film adaptations. It seems that probably there are more than 1,000 adaptations of Charles Dickens' novella, and they never stop. The most recent we have right now is 2019, and there were versions as early as 1901 on film. We're going to talk about maybe 7 to 10 in detail film adaptations of A Christmas Carol. We might mention some in passing also, but we're going to focus on just several. And I think it's interesting. I was listening to the Clay and Buck radio show, and Bill O'Reilly was on, and they were asking, "What's your favorite Christmas movie?" And there are some banal answers like Elf, or Santa Claus, or
Don't forget Die Hard.
yeah, God forbid, Die Hard also. But Bill O'Reilly said the 1951 A Christmas Carol, and then he says the second movie. Okay, and he's actually wrong about that being the second movie. He was thinking about the 1938 Christmas Carol, then he went to the 1951 Christmas Carol. But probably the first prominent sound adaptation of A Christmas Carol was made in 1935. It was called, I believe, Scrooge in the United Kingdom, where it was made at Twickenham Studios. Here it's called A Christmas Carol, and it stars Sir Seymour Hicks, who was a thespian who always did Scrooge. He made some silent films of Scrooge also when he was on the stage. And we're going to talk about that first. We're going to go in order here on movies. And Steve D. Stones here is going to tell us about his favorite Christmas Carol. Go ahead, Steve.
So I'm holding this up because I have an interesting story to tell about this. I don't recall ever seeing any Christmas Carol movie adaptation until I saw this one. This is the 1935 version entitled Scrooge. And the reason that this became the first one that I ever saw is because I walked into a music land during Christmas shopping season in 1986, and this was on the shelf. And I got looking at it, and I was really intrigued by this photograph here of Sir Seymour Hicks. You can see that it's been colorized, even though it's a black and white film. And when I took it home and I put it in my player, I was greatly intrigued by it because it really depicts London as a very bleak and dark and poverty-stricken place. And in many ways, a lot of the exterior shots shot on the streets of London reminded me of a Universal Studios horror monster film, which greatly intrigued me. It wasn't until many years later when I studied German Expressionism and I started to get into silent films that I realized that this film embodies a number of German expressionistic techniques, such as the use of shadow, because there's at least one scene in this film, probably two, where the shadow is being used. Like, for example, Scrooge is laying in bed and all of a sudden the shadow of one of the ghosts kind of consumes his whole figure as he's laying on the bed. And another shot where he's looking through a window and you see the shadow, I think it's the angel of death that's pointing to his grave. And so that kind of technique greatly intrigued me. And, I'm not the expert of all of the film adaptations like you are, but I really enjoyed the minimalist way in which this story is portrayed in this film, because it doesn't really show the ghosts that much, really, at all. They're just kind of implied, and you have to think that they're there with Scrooge.
Particularly Marley, right?
Particularly Marley. And another thing I really enjoyed about this film was Sir Seymour Hicks. For me, it felt like he was very appropriately cast, because his hair is really all over the place throughout the whole movie until he kind of grooms himself at the end. And he's got this perpetual look of grumpiness on his face. So that became how I looked at Scrooge, as this guy that was just completely angry at the world, and that, he always had this look of being angry and perpetually grouchy.
Joe, do you have any comments on this? And I'm going to talk about the movie too.
Yeah, I read up on this one, didn't have the opportunity to watch it. But yeah, the ghost, Marley being invisible, and the other ghost as well, and then the hair thing I saw was a motif
Okay, I think for 22 minutes, this is a perfect movie. It is perfect in the sense that it follows Charles Dickens' novella very, very well.
After that, it deviates a little
It
bit.
falls apart, okay? But one thing it does, and it's the only movie that really does this, in the 2009 Jim Carrey version, they sort of touch on it. It shows the mayor's feast that is in Dickens' novel. And Dickens' novels goes into great detail about the big feast in London. And this film, perhaps because it was filmed in London, and they showed the bakers making their food, tossing it to the kids, begging for stuff. They showed all the people at the feast, the speeches, and the announcement of the Queen coming and everything. And that is very faithful to Dickens' novel. What happens here in this, when it comes to Sir Seymour Hicks, I don't think he's as bad a portrayal as Reginald Owen in the 38 version, because he is a little bit superior. Remember how he quizzes Cratchit, can I afford this? Can I have a wife? And things like that early in the book. But he is too angry, and we don't know why he's angry. And this is the problem. When you only have one scene in The Ghost of Christmas Present, and that's Scrooge losing his wife because she sees him being cold and callous to people who owe him money, you don't understand what turns Scrooge into what he is. Now, Scrooge does get to see his fiancée with all their kids, but you have to see Scrooge unhappy. You have to see things happen to Scrooge that turn him into the cold, amoral man he is. I also like you mentioned, expressionism. There's a lot of scenes where you see Sir Seymour Hicks staring through windows at things and stuff like that.
So there's a shadow of his silhouette, and then there's his actual face looking through the glass.
Yeah, those are really good, strong scenes. And I don't know if Henry Edwards, the director, was influenced by expressionism, but I think he is in the film. Also, Steve, you remember that for a long time, this movie was cut by about,
20 minutes.
20 minutes or so, yeah, where it was shown in America in that truncated version. I used to see it on TV in that version. And it cut out the big Lord High Mayor feast.
Yeah, and that's the version that we're looking at here. This is the one that has all of that cut out of it. The baker's scene that you're talking about, and the feast that you're talking about with the mayor. So this is the 54-minute version. And that's why I mentioned earlier that it wasn't until nearly 30 years later after I bought this that I realized, well, there's a much longer version of this out there. And so I didn't see the much longer version until probably 25, 30.
Yeah, because it popped up on YouTube finally, and you can see it.
Yeah, and now you can buy that version too, of course.
Yes, you can. And also, who plays Bob Cratchit in this version again? Donald somebody, I think.
Donald Calthrop.
Yeah, he's good. And Cratchit family looks poor in this version. And Calthrop, he actually speaks back to Scrooge a couple times, which a lot of versions, including the 38 version, makes Cratchit into a meek person, overly meek person, sometimes even dumb-sounding person. But Calthrop does a really good job. One more thing is in the full version shows Scrooge sitting next to Cratchit singing in a church. The truncated version, which you still can see out there, shows him just rejoicing after he's raised Cratchit's wages. This is a good version. It's a lot of fun to watch, and many people haven't seen it, as the fact that Bill O'Reilly hasn't seen it because he thinks that the 51 version was a second version. But no, this is the first version that's out there. I really would like to see a Blu-ray of this sometime, don't you think?
Of this? Or are you
Yeah.
talking about
Yeah,
the
this
38?
version.
Yeah, it would be it would be great if there would be extras too. I mean, obviously they can't have extras of any of the cast because I'm sure they're long deceased now. But just to have extras talking about, what went into making it, and whatever kind of historical information that may be out there with regard to this film.
Definitely. Also, it's a little bit blurry when you see it. That's why I'd also love to see a good sharp print of it out there, and see it in more detail. And I hope people get a chance to watch it. It's very easy to find. It's probably also on Amazon, but sometimes Amazon will show like a colored version or something. So your best bet might just be to go to YouTube and watch a 70.
I think YouTube has got at least 15 different
Versions in the public domain.
prints on there.
Yeah.
And you have to look at the length of time each one is. If it says 74 minutes, then you know you have the complete print, the full length version.
That's true. So now we're going to go to the 1938 version of Christmas Carol, which starred Reginald Owen. And this is the one most people probably know about, although fortunately other ones are getting more play now. And in our poll, it is in a close match with the 1984 version as the best one. I enjoy this movie. I'm gonna probably eviscerate it later, but I do like the movie. In fact, I bought like 4 or 5 gifts because Amazon sells it as a new DVD for $5 right now. But it is extremely flawed. However, the esteemed scholar Frank Dello Stritto loves this version, and I'm going to read from his book. His memoir. I saw what I saw when I saw it, about his experiences watching this as a child, and he talks about how he saw A Christmas Carol became the first story he saw in 2 movie versions, the 1938 version we're talking about, and the post-war British movie we'll talk about later with Alastair Sim. And he talks about how for him the 1938 MGM is magic, the 1951 renowned film is heavy going. After the MGM version appeared, I did not see the renowned version again for more than 40 years and was not pleased when I did. Now, I'm going to see if I can find, I urge you to read his book, and we'll have a link to his website where he talks in more detail, but I'll read a little bit more about his opinion on these films. The 2 Scrooges are equally unpleasant, but from the outset I can see in MGM's Reginald Owen what I cannot in Renowne's Alastair Sim, a decent man inside trying to get out. What grows through Owen's performance is not so much his joy, but his conscious introspection. Before he's redeemed, he must suffer. The emergence of the good Scrooge at the film's conclusion is awakening in the MGM version and a transformation in the renowned. Owens becomes a whole man and Sim's a giddy fool. After a few years of my watching A Christmas Carol, the basic question of the plot occurred to me. Are the ghosts of Jacob Marley and the 3 Christmas bears truly supernatural visitations, or are they, as Scrooge himself ponders, products of his own indigestion? Did his own dreams lead him to a better life, or did ghosts literally take him by the hand? Later versions of the tale often leave some clue after the ghosts have departed, proving that they are indeed the agents of Scrooge's deliverance. But not Dickens' novella, nor the renowned and MGM versions. When Christmas morning arrives, no hard proof remains what really happened the night before. Buried in all 3 is a passing remark that I always noted, but only years later led me to favor Scrooge's subconscious. The ghost of Christmas past returns Scrooge to his boyhood school to see his young self stranded there while all his classmates go home for the holiday. His sad loneliness is burst by the joyous rival sister sent by the repentant father to bring the unhappy boy home. He also says in this book he did not like the appearances of the want and ignorance, the children. I tend to think that any version that doesn't have want and ignorance in it fails, and want and ignorance with the Ghost of Christmas Present is not in the 35 or 38 version. Let me tell you what my issues are with Reginald Owen. We don't once again know what made Scrooge what he is. The 1938 version, it gives Scrooge a short time with the Ghost of Christmas Past, where his younger sister, very much younger sister, comes in. And that's odd too, because Fan is, by all accounts, either around his age or even perhaps
Excuse me.
And also, what's her name? Anne Rutherford is the Ghost of Christmas Present. I mean, she's like the most bubbly, pixiest, cute Ghost of Christmas Present you'll ever want to see. You wouldn't mind dating her. She may be the only Ghost of Christmas Present you'd like to ask out on a date.
Past, right?
Past, I'm sorry, yeah, past. And she just abruptly ends things. And the thing is over. You have to understand why Scrooge is what he is. Reginald Owen does not, he just is a cranky, angry man. And he's also, there's a scene in that movie where he takes the port that belongs to Bob Cratchit and sticks it in his coat. Scrooge, people need to understand this. Scrooge is not a dishonest man. He is actually a scrupulously honest man to the point where he doesn't have any feeling in what he does. It bothers me when Scrooge is depicted as someone who would commit a crime, because that's not Ebenezer Scrooge. Also, I'm going to say something good about the 38 version right now. I think that Barry McKay is probably the best Fred, Scrooge's nephew, there is. He's goofy, he's irascible, he acts like a jerk sometimes, but he is as Charles Dickens depicts Fred, and he's very good-hearted. Once again, the 38 version fails because it has Fred not being married. Fred is married, and there's the implication, which is completely false, that Fred needs money to marry Bess. He doesn't. He's doing pretty well on his own. And this brings me to one more thing I can't stand about the movie. I'm sorry. Once again, I do enjoy it. I watch it 2 or 3 times every year. Is Scrooge goes to the Cratchit house. There are various versions that do this. The 1970 version does it. Muppet Christmas Carol does it. I don't care too much about Muppet. I just love the songs in that one. But Scrooge does not go to the Cratchit house. He doesn't go uninvited and disturb their Christmas. The wonder of Dickens is Scrooge pretends to be what he is the next morning and then reveals he's a changed man to Bob Cratchit. The 1938 version also makes the Cratchits look like a middle-class family. I mean, their house is so nice, you would think that he might be a junior partner to Scrooge. That's not the way it's depicted. The Cratchits are poor. Also, Scrooge fires Bob Cratchit in the 1938 version, which is ridiculous. Maybe that's the reason why he had to come back to the house, because obviously Cratchit wasn't going to go to work. But it's just a mess of a movie. It's fun to watch. Like I said, I bought it for people because I want them to be introduced to A Christmas Carol. But it is wanting in many, many ways. It has some of the kind of arrogance that Hollywood had back then when they thought they could better portray the movies. What was it? The one with Pearl Buck. I always forget the name of the movies. The woman won an Oscar in it. But another one I do know for sure is Pride and Prejudice, where they changed plots in that movie too. But once again, it has a lot of fans, including Frank, who we deeply respect, and it's doing well in our poll. Steve, Joe, do you have anything to say about the 38 version?
I don't remember. You know, you gave me an assignment a number of years
You
ago.
did review it a while back.
To compare and contrast the two, but in all honesty, I don't remember much about it. What I can remember is that it seems to, if I contrast it with the 35 version, in the 35 version, Ebenezer Scrooge looks like he's as poverty-stricken as the rest of London, particularly his living environment. In the 38 version, he looks like he's doing pretty well.
Yeah, those Cratchits have a great house.
Yeah.
They really do.
Is this
Yes.
the one with the hat? When Cratchit throws a snowball, his hat
Yeah, he
falls?
knocks off Scrooge's hat and he gets fired.
Yeah, I don't like that scene.
And then Cratchit's like looking at some guy who's walking in front of him after he's all glum and everything, and the guy's tail of a dead animal is, and he starts, all of a sudden he starts laughing, and then in the middle of the street raises his hands up and says, "Merry Christmas!" He buys chestnuts. And also, MGM made A Christmas Carol that looks like a movie studio portraying London in the 19th century. And other versions are show a more realistic London. Gene Lockhart plays Bob Cratchit. I love the actor Gene Lockhart. He's really good on Miracle on 34th Street. He's really good in Going My Way. His wife played Mrs. Cratchit. I can't remember her name right now.
Kathleen Lockhart?
And maybe Kathleen. And even his daughter, June Lockhart, who became more famous, played Belinda Cratchit in the movie. So it's a good movie, but it is deeply flawed, and it has nothing, very little resemblance to Dickens' novel. So now we're going to go to the 1951 version starring Alastair Sim. And it is my favorite version of all of them. It was made by Renowned Studios. When it premiered in London, Bela Lugosi was at the premiere. And it was probably called Scrooge in London. He was making Mother Riley Meets the Vampire at the time, but there's photos of him at the premiere. And a young Clive Donner was a photo editor in that film, I believe, and he later directed the 1984 Christmas Carol. But what makes Alastair Sim the best Christmas Carol is two things. He is scrupulously honest, he is scrupulously without pity. He's somebody who can be nice to you if he wants to be, but basically he treats the world with contempt. He is not an angry, bitter old man with wavy hair or stooped over like a hunchback like Reginald Owen. He simply depicts the world as a cruel, hard place, which he says in the movie when he's a young man, and he will not allow sentiment into his life. He's been hurt too much. But he is very honest. There are scenes where he's just talking to a man, begging him for more time, and he's asking something like, "Did I ask you for more time to make you my loan?" And he's just lost. The magic of Scrooge is he's lost the ability to feel pity. He's lost the ability to feel compassion. He is a person who will treat you honestly, but he does not know mercy anymore. He does not have the gift of charity. One thing that the 1951 version does so well is it spends an inordinate amount of time with the ghost of Christmas past, which is very, very important because we need to understand why Scrooge is what he is. And the earlier versions don't give you a full portrayal of what Scrooge is. Therefore, you're just seeing this angry man blustering around. There's a scene in Dickens' novel when Scrooge refuses to give any money to the businessmen who are seeking to help the poor. When the conversation is over, Scrooge has a higher opinion of himself, Dickens writes. And that is the way Scrooge sees the world, what gives him gain. He has this cold world that when the ghosts finally come, he's revealed about how cold and empty his world is, his material world is. And he gets to realize that the Cratchits actually have far more in their lives because they love one another and things like that. But getting back to the ghost of Christmas past, Scrooge says to I don't know, sometimes they change the name of Fan. But Fan is really great in this movie. She comes to visit him and he's depressed. And she's telling him, you don't know how many people love you. And he says, you love me, then you must live forever, Fan. Nobody ever loved me before, nobody ever will. And so he's filled with a lot of he hasn't had love in his life. Dickens hints, and there are in movies, that his father was very, very cold to him also. I don't know if this is in, some people try to say that Scrooge's mother died giving birth to him. I'd have to reread the book, which I do every year. I don't think it's necessarily that, but it might be. But we have to know how utterly alone Scrooge feels. And then also, in the Ghost of Christmas Past, this may be the only movie that does it. You see Fan's death. And Fan is trying to get a promise from Ebenezer that he'll protect her son. And when she dies, the look in Scrooge's eyes, you almost see light going out. And the death of the only person he truly loves him, even causes Scrooge to turn more toward the world and reject his wife-to-be. And those are in most all of the versions where he loses his fiancée. She leaves him. Then there's one more scene, this is apocryphal, in the movie where Scrooge and Marley are now businessmen, and the gentleman who recruited Scrooge and Marley away from Fezziwig. In fact, there's a scene where they even take Fezziwig's business. These are apocryphal, but they do a good job of showing what Scrooge is.
Mr. Jorkin, right?
Mr. Jorkin, yeah. Scrooge and Marley are sitting there, and I don't think Alastair Sim even talks in this entire scene. Marley does most of the talking, but Jorkin's lost all the money, and if they go under, it's going to destroy the business. And so Scrooge and Marley make the proposal that they want 51% of the business. And it's just fun watching these two immoral men just almost feel like plump peacocks because they know they've got the business now. And Jorkin has that memorable line, "Reprieved, reprieved," because he knows he's not going to be in trouble because he holds a secret to all their immorality in business right now. So I think that a very strong case can be made that the 1951 version is the finest version. It's free on YouTube. Watch it. See it. I don't know, Steve, is there a Blu-ray of this?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I would be surprised if there wasn't. I mean,
I'd like to get it if there is. Joe, what do you think of the 51 version?
I'm just checking if there's a 51
You don't have to
Scrooge
look.
Blu-ray.
You don't have to look and see if there's a Blu-ray. They're capable of doing that.
I think there is.
you know, I would make comments, but I don't think I've seen the 51. I'm embarrassed to say that. I don't think I've seen.
Well, now you know what you want to do on Christmas Eve,
Yeah,
right?
I watched it this morning, and I agree with most of what you say. I mean, it's between this and 84 for me. I think I prefer 84 a little bit more, but you talked about Fan's death scene, and like, there's a lot of nice touches throughout. Like, the older Scrooge watching the promise go down, he then realizes he hasn't been taking care of Fred, and he just, he kind of breaks down and tries to apologize, asks for forgiveness.
He does. He does.
Yeah, I don't know if I like Jorkin, but he's well done in the movie. It's just apocryphal, you know?
Yeah. I mean, you know what? I read this every year. There could be a Jorkin thrown in there somewhere, but I doubt it, all
I
right?
think he's from David Copperfield, right?
Yeah, I think you might be right. He might be right. So, there is also a character. By the way, I'm listening to a podcast right now called Scrooge, A Christmas Carol by a guy named Colin Murr. We'll try to put a link to it, and he likes the 51 version as well. And he went through the 35 and 38 and some other ones. There is a scene that's almost become iconic. The servant girl who greets Scrooge when he goes to Fred's house on Christmas, because he has received an invitation to Fred's house. And she looks a little bit like Audrey Hepburn, but to me she almost looks otherworldly, and she just nods throughout it. And Scrooge looks at her, and there are actually websites, I think, devoted to that one actress, because she's so striking, even though she has got no she's only in the film for like 2 minutes, and she basically nods in the film. And she has a striking look, almost otherworldly, looks a little bit like Audrey Hepburn too. I want to mention that there are some TV versions. We're not going to get really into them in the 50s. I think that Basil Rathbone played prominent roles. So did Frederick March. In 1949, there's a rather mediocre TV version, but Vincent Price highlights it by narration. The next one we're going to get to now, and Joe, no. I'm going to talk briefly about this. If you guys haven't seen it, that's okay. It has wonderful songs. It is, it's Mr. Magoo's Christmas Carol.
Mr. Magoo's Christmas Carol.
And it kind of surprised people how successful it was. It was made by Henry Saperstein. You know Saperstein's name, don't you, Joe? He brought a lot of those Japanese monster movies to America. Some of them. Look it up.
I'll look it up later.
Yeah. So, believe it or not, it's really good. Jim Backus is Mr. Magoo, and it's done in the way of a Broadway play, and it even has him showing up and everything, and the different acts and stuff like that. It has wonderful songs. One of my favorites, Razzleberry Dressing Song, or I'm All Alone in the World. And we're going to talk briefly about the 70 version later. And one problem that film has, although many people like it, is the songs are pretty bad, save one. But
my mother would disagree with you.
Your mother needs to watch other ones too. Okay, but anyways, the Mr. Magoo's Christmas Carol is a really good movie if you can find it. It was on Peacock last year, but I didn't see it this year. You can buy it though. It has some really wonderful songs. It's sort of interesting. It starts with the Ghost of Christmas Present and goes to the Ghost of Christmas Past. And that's probably a good idea because the main focus is on Scrooge's relationship with the Cratchits. But it's a really good version, surprisingly good. There is a really bad 1969 cartoon version. We don't even need to bother. It's from Australia. And then there's a 1970 version that starred Albert Finney, who's a superb actor. And it had Alex Guinness as Marley.
Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Has any of you guys seen this movie?
I have.
What do you think about it, Steve?
Well, I've only seen it once. I enjoyed it. I mean, I don't think I would put it as my favorite, but I enjoyed it.
Did you like Scrooge traipsing through in his nightshirt in London as the movie's coming to an end?
I honestly don't even remember that.
It has a great song called "Thank You Very Much." That song won an Oscar. There's not another song in that movie that's significant, even though it is a musical. I enjoy it too. I haven't brought myself to watch it this year, but I've watched it several times. Once again, it breaks that cardinal rule with me. It has Scrooge going to the Cratchit house, and he practically takes the entire town of London with him. All right, when he gets there.
That happens to Muppets too.
It does. But Muppets, at least you don't take seriously. And finally, it has a scene that I just think, and Colin Mirror brought this out to greater detail if you read his podcast, or if you would listen to his podcast. I'm not a podcast guy, I'm just learning, dude, okay? So, but it has Scrooge going into hell. And that gives the presumption that Marley is coming from hell. And I want to bring this point up, and we'll get more in detail when Pat Nilsson talks about the 2019 A Christmas Carol with Guy Pearce. Marley is not in hell. If you read the novella A Christmas Carol, he is clearly in a purgatory state. So it is such an indulgence for that film to actually say that Scrooge put Scrooge in hell. And it's just one more strike against the well-meaning 1970 version. Anyone have any comments?
It's been a while since I've watched it. I think that when he's in hell, Marley is also there, and it's some kind of sweatshop thing. It's been a while, like I say.
There's a bunch of beefy men carrying
men.
the stuff in.
I'm not opposed to Scrooge, like, thinking that he goes to hell at some point, because he's being scared straight, you know? It's fine to show him what could happen eventually, but I don't like Marley being there, you know?
Well, there are versions that show Scrooge falling down. I mean, Jim Carrey one, which we'll talk about later. Patrick Stewart has it to an extent where he falls into his own grave. But going all the way to hell, it just doesn't work, in my opinion. And I actually, well, anyways, I'll say this though: Scrooge is well acted Scrooge. Okay.
And you're still talking about the 1970.
Yeah. What's that actor's name? I just said his name a second.
Albert Finney.
Albert Finney is a good actor, and you can appreciate his portrayal. He's quite young in the movie, but he does look old. But once again, Albert Finney is also dishonest. They make him out to be a criminal. And Scrooge is a scrupulously honest person. People need to understand that. He has lost the gift of charity and compassion and empathy and pity. That's his problem. He cannot feel empathy with people. He cannot feel for them. He's not a crook, though. All right, let's go now to 1984, which this is A Christmas Carol starring George C. Scott. And Scott, I read before this, was cognizant of the fact that Alastair Sim was the perfect Scrooge. And so he went into great detail, he's a fantastic actor, to do a portrayal that did not emulate, did not try to copy Sim, but would bring some of the kind qualities that Dickens brings out. And in my opinion, this is almost as good as a 1953 A Christmas Carol.
1951.
51, sorry about that. This is almost as good. Scott is really, really good. Scott is a little more congenial than, and a little more whimsical. I don't know, how do you say it when he like maybe even when he's being mean, he might have a little bit of a twinkle in his eye, I think, sometimes.
What I remembered when you and I were watching it just 2 days ago is that he doesn't seem to express any sense of fear like you would see with some of the previous portrayals of Scrooge.
Oh yeah, Sim does fear very well too, particularly with Marley. And yeah, this Scrooge likes to bargain. You notice how he's saying, well, can we not discuss something? Or he'll say something like, I have no business to conduct here. And then he also does assumptions, like when he sees the Cratchit family in The Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come, he seems to think it's all over. He says, you can take me home, Ghost. I don't, there's nothing more I need to see. So he continually has to learn that there's more he needs to do. But I think this is the kind of guy who, if he wants to be, he has enough of humanity to actually be charming if he wants to be. He just chooses not to be. You remember, he also has a sense of humor. When the gentlemen are coming to try to give him, try to solicit some donation to him, he will say, he says something like, have you met us? No, I do not, nor do I have any wish to. Okay? Little witticisms like that, mean witticisms. And also, when he talks about, Scrooge says that thing, if they're going to die, they better do it and decrease the surplus population. Sim does that so wonderfully. He says it almost airily, like it's just something to say, you know. And then they ask him in this movie, and remember Michael Gough, the character actor, is one of the businessmen. He's a cult film guy. He's in what movie is he in, Steve, again?
He's in Horrors of the Black Museum, and
yeah.
he played Batman's butler in the 1989 Batman with Michael Keaton.
Yeah, and he's in Trog too, which is not as
Joan Crawford.
movie. But anyway, so they say, surely you don't believe that. And George C. Scott says it with all my heart. And you can see he's proud of the fact that he can change. He can switch his feelings from not caring about people who have made their own decisions, or in a situation that he is different than. So he is an amoral man, but he seems to have a little bit of congeniality you don't see in other Scrooges. Like when he gets rebuked by the ghost of Christmas past, he kind of makes apologies for these things, all right? And he also, when he's being mocked in a good, friendly manner by his nephew at the party, he says, "I don't take offense, because of the occasion and everything." And sometimes he'll look affronted, like when the ghost of Christmas present, Scrooge says something like, "Wow, that's a nice meal." "Oh, no, not a very big goose," he says. And the ghost says, "It's all Bob Cratchit can afford." He sort of looks mildly offended, And then he grabs his lapels when Bob Cratchit says, "The founder of the feast, Mr. Scrooge," and then of course Mrs. Cratchit goes off on him. I really like George C. Scott's portrayal. It was the first movie I saw off my mission to Peru with my family. I saw the premiere. It played in theaters in England, probably Europe too. But it's a really superb edition.
I think the only criticism you had of it, and it wasn't really a criticism, when you and I were watching it the other day, you pointed out that the Cratchit home looked more like it was middle class than it was poverty stricken.
Yeah, until we saw the front door, it looked a little bit more poverty stricken, didn't it? But you're right. The best Cratchit house of any of these films is the 1935 version, in my opinion. Would you agree?
Yeah. Well, I'm a fan of the 35, so.
And also, these films have to, particularly the 51 and 35 versions, show London as it probably looked in 1840s,
Well, one thing I noticed as you and I were watching the 84 one is there's a scene that's very similar to the 35 version where the kids are running down an ice sheet in the street, which I like that touch. I like seeing the scene of the kids that just they don't have to have, like kids of today, they got to have their cell phone and all their gadgets and things. These kids are just out in the street sliding across ice. So I saw that in here, and then of course it's in the 35 version too.
It's also in the 38 version, to its credit. And I think Dickens writes that Cratchit even slides on the ice in his book too. Scrooge needs to understand how empty his life really is. He's satisfied that his material situation is so well that he's been a success in his life. And what the ghosts show is how much more he could do.
He's a success financially, but he's not a success socially and interacting with other human beings and having compassion and love
And that's true. And there's a version in here that's not in the book. I don't believe it's in the book. But when he's meeting the ghost of Christmas present near the end, they take him to where a bunch of people are living in the street, among fires. And there's a man who found some potatoes fell off a cart, and his kids are eating them, and he's very bitter. He walks away, and his wife follows him, and he says, "Look at these hands. These hands have done hard work. They want to do hard work." And he captures the despair of a person who wants to work but can't get the job and can't support his family.
And he insists that he didn't steal them too, if I remember.
Yes.
He didn't steal the potatoes.
He's very bitter because he can't do these things. George Orwell portrays this kind of Englishman in the book Down and Out in Paris and London. And it's a really powerful scene. And the woman refuses to go to the Paris poorhouse because she knows what those places are like. And it's just a powerful, powerful scene. And it's okay for movies to go away from the book. film and literature are different animals. But the problem with a 38 version or a 70 version is you can't flip the plot around so much to change it to key parts. And also, you need to understand why a man is the way he is. And the power of the 1951, 1984 versions, and to an extent the 99 version, which we'll talk about too, is that they show Scrooge. They show why Scrooge became how he is and what he forgot.
Would you apply that kind of thinking to a science fiction film or even a horror film? Because, when I think of, and I don't mean to divert into another genre, but thinking about Michael Myers and Halloween, I really did not want to know why Michael Myers became the way he did, and I really didn't want to know why Darth Vader became as he did, because that's part of what made him more evil. But you could say, well, but Scrooge is not an evil man, so in this sense, we do need to know where he came from.
Exactly. We need to know why Scrooge is not opening his heart to people. Okay, is cold to the person who needs some kind of assistance. Now, Joe is going to talk about the next one, which is my wife's favorite one, and I enjoy it because it has wonderful songs, and it's very funny too. It's the 1992 Muppet Christmas Carol.
Before we get into that, just for a second, I also appreciate the 84 version. That's my Scrooge. You like Alastair Sim, I like George C. Scott. And just the scene of the homeless people, I think it also works as one of the most cogent rebuttals to the whole "are there no prisons, are there no workhouses" thing that Scrooge brings up, because it addresses that. It addresses why. Okay. Muppet Christmas Carol, 1992. Now we don't treat it as the most serious adaptation because it's it's for kids.
It's got the
Muppets.
greatest Marleys, doesn't it?
It does.
Marley and Marley.
Statler and Waldorf were brilliant for that role. I would also say it's one of the best movies of A Christmas Carol. I'm not saying like top 3 or anything, but top 5, top 7 maybe. We'll go with that. It's a Muppet movie foremost, so Scrooge is not the same Scrooge as in the book.
So is it the best, would you call it the best Muppet movie of, like there's Muppets in space, there's Muppets
I gotta tell you, that's the only Muppet movie I've watched, okay?
So would you say it's the best Muppet movie overall?
It's
maybe?
better than the recent ones. I'm not sure if it's better than like the classic ones, but...
Classic Muppets. Okay.
Okay, so Mr. Scrooge in this, he's a little bit different. He has this person, this Muppet, Mr. Applegate, that's a money lender, that he's lending money to Applegate, and Applegate is behind on his debt. And Applegate is like, "Don't shout at me, sir," and he's just wanting, time or some reprieve of this. And what do you think the Scrooge of the book would say to that?
The Scrooge of the book would just turn away.
Well, he'd turn away. If he's George C. Scott, he'd have a witty remark, but he's honest, and, the guy's behind on his contract. This Scrooge picks Mr. Applegate up and throws him out the door.
Michael, who's Scrooge? Who portrays Scrooge?
Michael Caine.
Michael Caine, yeah.
And he has a quote on how he approached this role. It's, "I'm going to play this movie like I'm working with the Royal Shakespeare Company. I will never wink. I will never do anything Muppety. I'm going to play Scrooge as if it is an utterly dramatic role and there are no puppets around me." And obviously that's only kind of true because he is still
He almost
part
has a
of the
smile on
slapstick.
his face, though, sometimes when he gets ready to put the guy out.
Sometimes, but then again, Shakespeare also had some goofy moments, so I get the sentiment. He's treating the Muppets as real actors and treating his performance as such, just within this world, with a goofy, more slapstick tone.
Well, there's the bookkeepers who are hilarious. I mean, they're total people who are sycophantic to the boss,
Yeah, a bunch of rats he hires, and they'll just say whatever to save their own skin. So not only just Cratchit, he has a bunch of bookkeepers with him, and that's just for like a Greek chorus little bit where they're also campaigning for the thing. There's a lot of songs. They're mostly very good. And it's balancing the tone of the book with the tone of the Muppets. And so you have this little character, Bean Bunny, who ends up being the person that he gives the money to buy the turkey at the end. But he's also like impoverished on the streets, and we actually see the little Bean Bunny Muppet twitching in the snow. A lot of black comedy also in this movie, but it's a different Scrooge. I still like the progression that they have with this Scrooge.
Well, who narrates it?
Who narrates this?
Gonzo, right?
Gonzo, yeah. Gonzo's in there playing Charles Dickens. He has Rizzo the Rat as his companion, and they just go throughout, and they make the story more approachable to narrate it for kids. When it gets dark, they'll leave, and they'll try and take they'll inject some humor into otherwise sad moments. But, going through each of the ghosts is interesting. Like, okay, the ghost in the book is not just some human wearing a halo or something. It's an indescribable kind of thing that's all floating and weird and androgynous. And
The Ghost of Past is actually done well in this
yeah,
version.
this is mostly androgynous. It's a new puppet, but they have it underwater, and it's all floating with hair. It's like a child. It's one of the better versions, I'd say. And during those moments, Scrooge with the ghost is kind of sad. He's going over the thing. He was violent before that, violent and mean before that, but now he's sad for that thing. Seeing his past. There's a song with Belle, his love interest, that gets cut for some reason.
You can catch it on the older DVDs.
This DVD has it. Disney Plus has a version, but you have to go through the menu to find that. And, honestly, I think it really serves the storytelling for that. But then we transition into the Ghost of Christmas Present, who... Forgetful and uncharacteristically happy. Again, not one of the Muppets, but a new, big, human-sized puppet. Probably just a suit. And, there's supposed to be a bit of an edge. He's supposed to throw Scrooge's words back at him. He only does that once. He's more just, really good-spirited. Sort of like a one-dimensional character
You have to give this movie some slack because it's a comedy also.
It's a comedy.
Funny.
And Scrooge plays off of this ghost so well, it progresses his character that much more. Now he's happy. Despite himself, he's having fun with Christmas now. And that's very important for this version of the story. But then, no ignorance and want, unfortunately. But then again, this is
it's not really
a much
necessary
happier
in this one.
ghost, so there wouldn't really be that. Then, he ages throughout the day, just like most Christmas presents should.
And wait till we get to Jim Carrey.
And then he's gone, and the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come is yet again another new puppet thing. And it's supposed to be the scary one, so Scrooge is scared. And then he actually... some versions make it a mystery as to who is on the tombstone. This one doesn't. He's just buying for time. It's obvious to him, obvious to us, that his name is the one on that. But if he can make it not so by bargaining briefly with the spirit, he'll try. And then ultimately, he carries through the happy trajectory at the end of the movie.
And I don't mind Scrooge marching through London singing songs in this one. Paul Williams did the songs, and they're great songs. I particularly like the one More Sleep Till Christmas, and the one Michael Caine sings at the end, too. It's funny. I wonder how many kids watching this movie know that Ratso Rizzo is named after a character in Midnight Cowboy.
Oh, Rizzo the Rat was named after Ratso Rizzo.
Yeah. Oh, Rizzo the Rat. Yeah, it's Ratso Rizzo. It's a sort of take on Ratso Rizzo from a movie that back in the early 70s was rated X for a while. Midnight Cowboy. John Voight and...
a bit of an edge, black comedy.
Dustin Hoffman.
Yeah. What else? There's just a lot of comedy. Marley and Marley are just hilarious in this movie. And Miss Piggy plays Mrs. Cratchit. That's just great, too. And there's a great scene. So I don't mind Scrooge going to the house because it brings us more of Miss Piggy's humor in the film. It's quite good. I really enjoy this movie. We watch it usually every Thanksgiving and Christmas Eve also with friends. So it's a fun film. I want to mention, before we get into another version, I want to mention the 1971 A Christmas Carol cartoon. It won an Oscar. It also stars Alastair Sim, and also stars the same guy playing Marley. Michael Hordon plays Marley in the 1951 version. He's very good also. Hordon also plays Scrooge in a little scene 1970 hour-long British version you can see on Amazon. But anyways, the 1971 version is very good. Richard Williams did the animation, and it has eye-popping shots from above as it goes through. It manages to do the entire Christmas Carol, getting all the integral parts in it, by the way, more or less, in 25 minutes. So after this, you'll listen to us. Go to YouTube, say A Christmas Carol 1971, and enjoy this movie. One thing I want to mention about the 51 version, which doesn't happen, I don't think it's a major thing, is you don't have Scrooge going back to the businessmen and offering his, and apologizing and giving his thing. But you know the way Scrooge is, that he will do that. Also, the one thing about the 51 version I love so much is the housekeeper. And I'm not going to go find the actress's name right now, but she was great. And he has a scene where Frank Dello Stritto was saying that he was just giggling. I don't agree with Frank, all respect to him. I think that's a wonderful transformation by Alastair Sim, where he just upsets the housekeeper so much she can't believe what he's doing. He's so out of character that he chases her down the stairs, and she's frightened and screaming, and he stops her and says, "I am in earnest," and he gives her a Christmas present. She thinks it so she won't call the beadle, which is cops, and she looks at him and she goes, "A Christmas present for me?" That is such a powerful scene in that 951 version. And then he says, "How much do I pay you?" And she says with frustration and anger, 2 shillings a week. And he says, "It's henceforth raised to 10. And then she uses an old saying, and she says, "Bob's your uncle." She's so happy. Merry Christmas, Mr. Scrooge. One more thing, too. I can't stop myself. I'm sorry. There are versions of Scrooge talking to the young boy, and I like it when they use the term, Scrooge says, "Go and buy the turkey." That's in the big turkey, as big as the boy. And the boy says, "Walker, Walker," and starts to walk away. That's an old British expression, too, of "you're joshing." And in fact, in the 1990 version, they say "you're joshing." So let's go to a version right now that was in 1999. I'll mention it briefly. It starred Patrick Stewart. Okay. I was saying Patrick Swayze earlier, people, in prep for this. Okay, it stars Patrick Stewart. He has played
It's not
Scrooge
Roadhouse.
Roadhouse, yeah. Yeah. And Patrick Stewart actually does a very good job. This is not my favorite Christmas Carol, but he does a really good job as Scrooge. He sort of is a little more too morose for Scrooge, but he is a realist. And he when Marley's dead, he looks at Marley and says, "We did it, Jacob. We made something of ourselves, you know." And it has I can't remember the actor's name. It's Cratchit. He plays a pretty good role in it. But he's also in that movie, A Merry War. But anyways, he's Patrick Stewart's very good in this film. It touches all the bases. There is a scene where, in a passage in the novella, where Scrooge starts to laugh, and he really doesn't know how to laugh. Okay, it comes out sort of shakily, and Patrick Stewart does that very, very well. He starts to bark. He's trying to laugh and everything, and he suddenly laughs. And there is one of the reason why I want to mention the Patrick Stewart version is because there's a scene in the novella where Scrooge wants to see tenderness, or happiness, I guess, tenderness and happiness with his death. He kind of demands it from the ghost of Christmas future. And we're taken to a young couple, and the man's coming up to the woman, and you can tell there's great stress in their lives. And the woman says, "Have you seen him?" He goes, "I have." And she goes, "Are we ruined?" And the man tells her that Scrooge is actually dead. And she's so relieved at that news because they know that they're going to have more time to pay their debt, and Scrooge wouldn't give it to them, that she starts to laugh. But then she stops because she feels, "I can't laugh over someone dead." That's in the Patrick Stewart version. And I appreciate that because that's an important part of the novella. Now, there was one made in 2009. I don't know if you guys have seen it. Joe, you've probably seen it, though. It's Disney's A Christmas Carol. Steve, you got to see this sometime because
No, you don't.
it takes. Well, I like it. In fact, I was going to watch it this morning, but I overslept. It takes Scrooge and almost turns it into a horror movie near the end. Okay. I mean,
And a slapstick comedy for
slapstick. Well, it's Jim Carrey, and it's done in that situation where you know who the actors are, even though they're in animation. Like Colin Firth is Fred in.
Gary Oldman is
Oldman is Bob Cratchit. It's a good movie, and so, well, it follows itself pretty well. It actually has one scene, and this is the only other one besides the 35 version where you see the bakers getting ready for the Lord High Mayor feast, and they throw out some beef to the kids because kids are asking for scraps, and a dog grabs it in this movie where the kids can get it. But when you get to the Ghost of Christmas Past with Carrey, what happens near the very end? Well, I can tell you. All right.
I know.
Okay, tell us, because it's really bizarre.
Christmas Past, right?
Christmas present.
Oh, present.
Ghost of Christmas present.
Well, let's go past first.
Okay, you talk about the past then.
I mean, this is one of the best Christmas pasts that there's ever been because, the book, it's all weird, constantly changing, flowing, changing into things. And having it be a flame makes a lot of sense. Especially because...
Well, there is a flame at the top of the head.
Well, having it be, totally a flame makes a lot of sense as well because... he puts the cap on. And that only happens a few times.
That happens in the book too, by the way.
Happens in the book, yeah. I think 84 has that maybe.
84 does to some extent, except that 84 is played by a grown woman, Angela Pleasance.
Yeah. And I guess this is my issue with the 2009 film is that he puts on the cap, which is a very faithful thing to the book to do, and then it shoots him up to Mars, and then he falls back down to Earth.
It goes over the top. You're right about that.
It's like the Coppola Dracula, where it's so faithful. It includes things no one else does. And yet it does them so weirdly. But yeah.
Okay, let me talk about
now.
the Ghost of Christmas Present. Okay. And the Ghost of Christmas Present's very old because he only lives for a year. All right? But this ghost is talking as he's literally, Steve, you got to see this. He's expiring. I mean, he's having heart attacks as he's talking, all right? And he's just chuckling and getting old and turns into, it's almost like Dracula dying, okay? It's so weird. And ignorance and want are way overplayed too in this. And so the ghost dies at the very end of the Ghost of Christmas Present. And then all of a sudden, the Ghost of Christmas Past turns into a full-blown horror movie. I mean, Claudio Fragasso should have directed that, all right? Or something like that. Or some other director, because Scrooge is turned into this tiny little man who's being chased by the demon horses of death, all right? And he's going through little what do you call it? Like little tubes and things like that.
Sewer and drain pipes.
Yeah, running into
over
rats.
The ceiling.
It's a really, really bizarre. One thing I do like about the 2009 though is that they have the young woman and her husband again being told that Scrooge has died and being relieved they'll have 2 or 3 more weeks to pay. Well, anyway, so that's pretty good. Now we're going to go to, there have been other versions, and we're not capturing all of them, of course, but we're going to go to the 2019 version, which starred Guy Pearce. And it was a different version. It's almost about 150 minutes, and it has a different interpretation. It's controversial at times. I didn't like it the first time I saw it. Every time I see it, I like it more. There are things about it I don't like. I don't like the fact that Scrooge is a criminal, has conducted criminal activities in this version. I don't like that Scrooge sexually humiliates Mrs. Cratchit, who has a much, much bigger role in this version than any other version of A Christmas Carol. But there are moments that make this film pretty good. And author Pat Nielsen, who's written the Tara Drake series, really loves this version. It's his favorite. And he couldn't be with us today, but we are going to give him about 7 minutes or so now to talk about why he likes the 2019 Christmas Carol miniseries starring Guy Pearce. And also, who's the guy that plays Frodo? Not Frodo, who plays Gollum in the more recent versions?
Andy Serkis.
Andy Serkis is one of the ghosts in this.
Christmas Past, right?
But the ghosts in this movie, they take different shapes based on what Scrooge is seeing. And the Ghost of Christmas to the Future is like he dropped out of a Hellraiser movie or something. You know that? I also like this version because Marley is clearly in purgatory, which he is. So let's give Pat a few minutes and then we'll get back.
Hello, this is Dean Patrick. I want to thank Plan 9 Crunch for inviting me to talk about Nick Murphy's 2019 version of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, starring Guy Pearce, and why this is my favorite version of A Christmas Carol in film. Number one, this is a true ghost story. This is a dark and haunting film where Guy Pearce presents an astonishing performance of an Ebenezer Scrooge who is a vile and wicked villain who we learn through time in the film. We learn about Ebenezer Scrooge in this story and how he was sold into sexual slavery very early on with an awful deal made by his own father to his schoolmaster. And when you get into the heart of darkness here with Scrooge at that level, you begin to understand why Scrooge is the way he is. But in this particular portrayal of it, Scrooge is a man of uncompromising change, and as the spirits visit him, he is almost unbreakable. The performance is something that is truly reprehensible in many ways. It is a terrifying portrait of a man who hates everything around him and everything about others and about himself, if you will. Most of the film goes through the Ghost of Christmas Past as Jacob Marley is in a deal with the spirits to try and change Scrooge's heart. That's the premise of the film. Nothing really gets into Scrooge's heart until he sees the Cratchit family and sees Tiny Tim, who he becomes quite attached to, and change happens eventually through Tiny Tim. But I want to talk about an especially powerful scene in the film with Mary Cratchit. Mary Cratchit has decided 7 years ago, before Bob Cratchit was beginning to work for Ebenezer Scrooge, there is a need for Tim to have a surgery. And then surgery is way beyond their means. They do not have the ability to pay for any of it. So Mary Cratchit goes to Ebenezer Scrooge's house, and she is invited in, and Scrooge begins a terrifying dissection of her spirit. He breaks her down. He gets her to a point where she agrees to give herself to him for all of the money on Christmas Day. And in a heartbreaking and gut-wrenching scene, Mary visits Scrooge on Christmas Day. And Ebenezer Scrooge breaks her down. And you can see the performance here with Guy Pearce really getting into the human psyche and calling this and turning this into a human commodity, a virtue exchange. It breaks the spirit and it breaks the soul of Mary Cratchit. But as this has taken place, and just as Mary Cratchit is about to leave this awful scene, she turns to Ebenezer Scrooge and she looks him in the eye and she tells him that she's going to have a bright mirror held to his face one day, and that she is a woman, and that she has the power to summon such spirits, and that she will do it by any means. When she leaves that scene, it is such a powerful scene. It's unforgettable what she says and the power of this woman and the power of women in general, I believe. As the story progresses and it gets to the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come, Scrooge is shown that he has the ability to change one person. And rather than change everything about him, this is a story of redemption of one person. And as he's in the graveyard looking at himself and looking at Tiny Tim, he tells the spirits the only thing that he would have them change is Tim. With that offering to the spirits, he is given that second chance that we all have come to know with Scrooge at the end of the tale. And he does what it takes to save this young boy. One of the ways he does it is to prevent Tim from skating, or anybody else from skating, that would have eventually killed him. Another way that he does it is he goes to the home and he makes atonement for what he did to Mary by providing the family with more money that they could ever need in their lifetime, and also closing down the shop that has destroyed so many lives of Scrooge and Marley. And he goes about and he tells Mary at the very end, as Mary walks him out the door and looks at him and he looks at her, and he tells her that he can only do what he can in the future to be the very best that he can be. And that's how the tale ends, with Mary Cratchit looking upon all the people outside on Christmas morning and thanking the spirits for changing this man, but then looking into the camera and telling that there are still many others that need the same types of change, and that the spirits have much left to do. I find A Christmas Carol by Nick Murphy and starring Guy Pearce my favorite personal A Christmas Carol. It is a powerful and riveting tale. It is so compelling. It is terrifying in its portrayal of one man's hatred. And that hatred comes from being sold into sexual slavery by his own father. And these are the elements and the details that Nick Murphy captures throughout the film and that Guy Pearce portrays through a man who is so broken and so bitter, we wonder if it ever is possible to change. But in the end, the hope is given and the story is given, as Charles Dickens wanted, that we all can change and that we all can be better and do things for others in the way that we should, not only at this time of year, but throughout our lives. And that's my review, and that's my presentation here briefly about Nick Murphy's A Christmas Carol starring Guy Pearce. And I want to thank Plan 9 Crunch for inviting me, and Merry Christmas to everyone.
Okay, thank you, Pat. We appreciate that. Now, there are things in this movie like Scrooge, as a young boy, is sexually molested by the headmaster. And the idea is his father allowed him to be sexually molested so he could have boarding and school for his son. And the scene where Scrooge's sister comes and takes him away because his father is kicked out of the house and threatens to kill the headmaster if he ever comes near Scrooge again. Those are powerful scenes, but they are very apocryphal. They do not happen. I do like that Ali Baba is one of the spirits in this one, because Scrooge talks about Ali Baba being his only companion. And Guy Pearce has a very bleak existence. He doesn't think that there's any good in the world. And the reason he sexually humiliates Mary Cratchit, I don't know her name's Mrs. Cratchit.
It is Mary Cratchit in this
Is
movie.
it called? Yeah, sometimes they change the name.
Yeah, I don't think she has a name before this, but this one is Mary Cratchit.
Okay. It's because he wants to make a point in his own warped mind that anybody, even one as virtuous as her, will do evil for money. Okay? And he takes a pretty rough time in this movie. The man who plays Cratchit, he is openly contemptuous of his boss. He insults him, but he realizes his boss has power over him, and Scrooge doesn't seem to mind this. He almost seems to enjoy the sparring with Cratchit. And there's a larger role for Marley, of course, in this movie too. Despite all these things, which can be, if you're a purist, can be appalling. Okay? The final 30 minutes of the 2019 A Christmas Carol save it, because there's a scene where Scrooge finally gets it. He finally gets what's happening, and what he needs to do to both save himself and get Marley out of purgatory. And when he says it, there's a very tender scene where all the ghosts, including his sister, who gives a wonderful performance in this movie, walk away, satisfied the deed's been done. And I don't want to give away the very, very, very ending, but Scrooge does visit the Cratchit house. There's also a hint. Some people might think that Mary Cratchit summoned the spirits. I don't agree with that, although it's certainly open to interpretation that way if you watch the movie. And so let's just thank you, Pat, by the way, for what you said to add to this. There are many, many versions of A Christmas Carol. You can watch the one we just mentioned from 2019 on probably the Fox Movie Channel. Will air it 2 or 3 times over the next couple of days. And the Alastair Sim one will be on the Fox Movie Channel also the next couple of days. They tend to run them often around this time period. TCM will have the 1938 one, which, despite my evisceration of it, is loved by a lot of people, and I enjoy it too. The 35 version you can watch on YouTube if you want to, and the 70 version's on YouTube. The 84 version, I haven't seen it pop up on regular TV. Oh, it's on a channel called Positivity or something. It's 89, quite a bit. what the 1999 with Patrick Stewart shows up on TNT. It has once already this year because it was originally a TNT movie. So there's a lot of versions you can see out there. Most of them are on YouTube anyways. Steve and Joe, do you guys have any comments as we get near the end here?
Well, I should have some comments, but I'm not as I've said before, I'm a big fan of the 1935 version. So many of these other versions I actually haven't seen. So it looks like I have some catching up to do.
Joe, what do you have to say?
I'm primarily a fan of 84 and Muppet. I've seen Mickey's Christmas Carol from 83 like one time. As far as 2019, I don't like the changes, but I can see why they were made. And I think there was a 2022 animated Netflix remake of 1970 that I have no interest in.
That's what my mother was telling me.
Oh,
that she says there's a new animated one.
They foisted that upon us?
Mm-hmm.
I haven't watched it. Yeah, that's all I have to say, really.
We love A Christmas Carol, and I urge you to just watch it, okay? Also read the novella. Andy Brooks, a friend of our podcast, has published a book on Christmas stories. If you look up Andy Brooks Christmas Stories on Amazon, you can find it. It has in it, in the anthology, the abbreviated version that Charles Dickens went on stage of A Christmas Carol to read, which if you don't want to read the entire novella, you can read a significantly shorter one that also captures it. It's just a wonderful story, and it's probably the most adapted show out there. I mean, most adapted book out there in film. And we hope you guys have a Merry, Merry Christmas, and just get reacquainted acquainted for the first time with the Christmas Carol. And Plan 9 Crunch is at TikTok. It's on YouTube, and it's on Facebook. And we have plan9crunch.com, where Steve has written, and I have written, reviews of the 1935 A Christmas Carol. And so anyways, once again, Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays, and that's a wrap.
Thanks, Doug.